with a simple instinct that there is something more that I can do here. And for years, that instinct has animated much of Sewa International USA's work. Across our chapters and programs, our volunteers have stepped forward when communities needed help, often before anyone has even asked them to. But when you spend years close to those communities, a service also gives you something beyond experience. It gives you more questions. It gives you an understanding into why some interventions take root and endure while others struggle to, and why does one volunteer come for an afternoon while while another stays for years, takes responsibility, brings others along, and eventually becomes a leader. It's about what makes an organization resilient even during uncertain times or when community needs change. And perhaps I think one of the most important thing is how do we make sure that service teaches us what service teaches us on the ground, and how can we use it to build something stronger for the future. So that's these questions are a part of how we arrived at Seva Forum 2026. Over the past 1 year, we've done a lot of work in terms of policy cafes. And this time, this is our first event where it's a 2 day event. And our policy research and thought leadership team work grew from a belief that service should not only move us to act, it should also teach us. And that's why you see that the themes of our event are service, education, well being, and action systems at the end of the day. So it's because the proximity to communities allows us to see needs closely. It also gives us a responsibility to examine what works, what does not, where the gaps remain, and what we might do differently. And no one organization can answer all these questions alone. And sometimes progress begins by bringing into the same room people with diverse experiences and have been looking at the same challenge from different vantage points, so that it gives them the space to question, compare, disagree,
Hey, you
learn, and
okay?
perhaps better understanding. That is the spirit behind Seva Forum. So, let me, can we mute the audience? Okay. And over the next 2 days, we have 18 experts and we have more than 100 or 150 stakeholders who will come together around 4 areas that are deeply connected to the future of community impact, which is nonprofit sustainability, youth empowerment, health and well being, and the changing role of technology in nonprofit management. And the purpose is to ask better questions, capture what we learn, and carry those ideas beyond 2 days into research, partnerships, and practice. And this is the reason we are beginning our entire Seva Forum with volunteerism. Because, like Shrikantji has always, has already given a little overview, Seva itself has been built through volunteer energy. But anyone who has worked in a volunteer led organization knows that goodwill, however powerful, is the first stepstone. And the harder work is building an experience meaningful enough for them so that they keep returning to us. So, and none of this happens automatically, and this has to be built over time. So it becomes a question of organizational capacity too. So in that tone, this is where our conversation begins, from volunteers to impact, strengthening nonprofit sustainability. And what we want to do today is what we want to look beneath the act of volunteering itself, about how do we design opportunities around the realities of people's lives rather than asking people to fit themselves into systems built for another time, or what infrastructure allows organizations to sustain engagement rather than continually begin again. And finally, I am Kusuma Buttiraju. I'm the Associate Director for the Thought Leadership and Policy Research at Seva International. And it's my privilege to welcome all of you to our opening session and to moderate this conversation today. Before we hear from our panel, we are beginning with Seva itself and with the philosophy and what is the philosophy of service that brought us here. And it's my honor to invite Shrikantji, who's the president of Seva International USA, to formally open this for us. And just to give a brief overview of his own journey with Seva, Shrikantji's journey began with Seva in Atlanta in 2008 when he was working with the Bhutanese Refugee Empowerment Program as families arriving in a completely unfamiliar country began the difficult work of rebuilding their lives and finding a community here. And what began as service on ground grew into nearly 2 decades of work. And he went on to lead Seva's Atlanta chapter, take on national responsibility for fund development and partnerships. And during the COVID crisis, he led Seva's national war room in Atlanta. And at a moment when oxygen equipment was urgently needed in India, there was a desperate need. He opened his own company's warehouse to help Seva receive, organize, and move critical supplies. And last year, he became the fifth president of Sewa International USA. Mr. Shrikant is also an entrepreneur and the founder and president of GC Ingredients. What feels particularly relevant to our conversation today is something that he has said about Seva's own growth. As the organization becomes larger and more structured, the relationships between people still are always at the center. And because these relationships are strong, the work becomes easier to carry together. So, for his entire journey so far, from showing up to serve to building teams, relationships, resources, and an institution capable of serving at scale, we are very much grateful to be a part of the organization. So, we begin with him. Shrikantji, a very warm welcome to you, and I invite you to formally open the forum for us. Shrikantji, can you hear us? We are unable to hear you, Shrikantji. Just give me a minute. I'll try to figure this out.
Some reason.
He's trying to reconnect. One. He's at a bad intersection, so I'll go ahead and introduce Seva itself. So, just a few words about Seva International USA and the spirit that brings us together today. At Seva, Seva is more than just an idea. It is something that we usually put into action. And our work is powered by volunteers from across the nation who give their time, skills, and energy to strengthen communities and serve where help is needed the most. And you can see the spirit across our work. Through Seva Serve, volunteers come together throughout the year for hands on service from environmental projects and community cleanups to supporting local organizations. And just in the year of 2026, our teams have organized 470 activities across our 30 chapters and 4 regions, engaging more than 4,000 volunteers and contributing to over 10,000 hours of service. And if you look at our presence, we have been in the United States since 2003, but our presence initially started in India from 1989, and we also have a presence in over 25 countries. And some of our other programs, such as Doctors for Seva, we have more than 130 registered medical professionals across 5 chapters who are working alongside volunteers to improve healthcare access for underserved communities, who are also mentoring the next generation of healthcare professionals to be able to serve in communities through Seva and through nonprofits. And usually, the strength of Seva, if you see, in various areas, like even volunteer development or anything, it comes from the community ecosystem that we have built over the years. We have more than 100,000 contacts and community connections across our network. And our chapters, we have 46 chapters across the country. A few states have more chapters because these are also bigger states. And our chapters engage this community through 50 plus types of cultural, social, professional, sports, and cause based events, creating opportunities not only for service, but also for people to contribute to the mission in different ways. So this makes fundraising for nonprofits. It's not just about raising money; it's also about building relationships and sustaining participation. Because from top-down approach, most of the Seva leadership and everyone, they are all volunteers. And this is about helping a community member become a volunteer and hopefully become a donor, a recurring supporter, and eventually a long-term ambassador for Seva. And as you can see, based on Guide Star by Candidates rating, we have been, on Charity Navigator with a 4-star rating with a great score for transparency and accountability. So, at the end of the day, we believe that these are important to ensure that the lasting impact comes from something very simple, because people come together with a shared purpose, and they also want to ensure that they're committed to it too. So, what we try to do is that is the spirit behind trying to do this forum and bring people together. And over the next few days, let's look at different questions on nonprofit sustainability, volunteerism, youth opportunity, healthcare, and technology. And we will make sure that these conversations are translated into stronger action on ground with due time and with your help, of course. And ultimately, that is what Seva asks of us. It asks us to serve with humility, learn continuously, and work together to leave our communities stronger than we found them. So, with that in mind, now I go to our esteemed panelists, and we will start our introductions with them. So, let me begin with Naila Herbert. She is the Vice President of Programs of Girl Scout River Valleys. Naila has spent more than 15 years working across volunteerism, community engagement, nonprofit leadership, and equity. Until recently, she served as the Executive Director of Minnesota Alliance for Volunteer Advancement, and she came to MAWA's leadership after years within the organization, including serving as the board member and board chair. Her perspective is especially timely because the question centers much around MAWA's recent work. What if people have not stopped wanting to serve, but some of the systems we built for volunteering have stopped fitting the way people want to be served? Nyla's work has explored informal service, mutual aid, trust, accessibility, and what it means to build volunteer systems around real communities rather than expecting communities to adapt themselves to our systems. Nyla, welcome to the panel. Next, I'm delighted to welcome Alison Zewell, Network and Volunteer Engagement Manager at America's Service Commissions. Alison's career gives her an especially valuable vantage point, and it also seems like she is a great networker. So we are glad to meet you because she has experienced national level service from both the ground and the systems level. She is an AmeriCorps alumna herself, and later, while overseeing AmeriCorps initiatives in Wiyandet County and Kansas City within Kansas, the local Vista program more than doubled in size in less than 2 years. Today, at America's Service Commissions, her lens extend across the national service ecosystem, supporting state service commissions working on AmeriCorps, the Volunteer Generation Fund, youth service, and broader volunteer engagement. She has also helped shape national conversations about where volunteerism goes next, including work connected to the 2026 National Summit on Volunteer Engagement and the US National Volunteer Strategy. Alison, welcome to the forum, and we are glad to have you here. Our third panelist is Jordania Reeves. Has Jordania been able to join us today?
No.
Okay, not yet. Okay. So finally, we are pleased to welcome Kate Schritzel, the Director of Programs at Serve Connecticut. Kate has spent more than a decade helping organizations design, build, and strengthen national service programs. But she also began her journey inside national service, first as an AmeriCorps Connecticut public ally and as a supervisor of two AmeriCorps Vista projects. So over the course of her career, she has experienced the system from several directions. As someone close to service delivery, as someone supporting local organizations trying to enter the EMERCOP system, and as a leader within the broader state service network. She has served 2 terms on the board of America's Service Commissions, including its executive board, and in 2022 received the organization's Outstanding Commission Staff Award. Kate, welcome, and we are so glad to have you here as well. So from now on, what we'll do is we will start with the questions, and this is where our panel discussion starts. So for the introductory statements, Naila, I think I'll begin with you. You've had a lot of experience, and you've also written significantly about designing volunteer programs around barriers faced by specific communities. In that regard, how can nonprofits move from a one size fits all approach to designing volunteer programs that are tailored to the needs, motivations, preferences, and constraints of different groups? If you could share a few examples or models, with us, it would just make it easier for us to understand.
Wonderful, wonderful. First, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this fantastic forum. Uh, just the tremendous work that Sewa International USA does. It's such a pleasure and a treat to be with all of you today. So in my work that I've done over the past 20 plus years, we realized that it's important to really think about this one size fits all approach that many nonprofits have taken as the only one way. And we recognize that nonprofits must shift from treating volunteers as a monolith of free labor to engaging them as distinct stakeholder groups with unique assets, constraints, and motivations. It starts with replacing rigid operational roles with human-centered program design. So let's be honest. In the world of service and community building, we often hear the phrase all are welcome. It's a nice sentiment, but in practice, all default to neutral, which was actually built for a very specific privileged demographic. And when we try to build for everyone at once, we often build for no one. As we aim to diversify volunteerism, it's important to lean into a different philosophy. Prioritizing access and equity for a specific identity or group doesn't just help that group, it creates access and equity for all. A prime example of that is the curb cut effect. So we look at this in the physical world. So in the United States in the 1970s, disability advocates fought for curb cuts, which is essentially making space in the curb for small ramps that are graded into the sidewalk. They were designed specifically for people using wheelchairs. But today, look at who uses them. Parents pushing strollers, travelers with rolling suitcases, workers with heavy delivery carts, children on bicycles. So by solving a specific barrier for one group, the entire community gained a more fluid, accessible way to move. And so the curb cut effect is an investment in one that yields a dividend for the whole. So it's really important for us to think about how do we move beyond one size fits all in volunteerism? And we also have to be willing to dismantle standardized onboarding, rigid time commitments, and specific professional expectations. When we look at the history of volunteerism, we see that these standards were often rooted in white saviorism and middle class norms. They weren't designed for the single mother working two jobs, or the young person of color in an urban center, or the elder lived experience in the justice system. So one example of this and how we can intentionally redesign our volunteer programs to prioritize the needs and safety of Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQIA, neurodivergence, and persons with disabilities. First, we start with simplifying communication, making sure that we don't use the jargon of our organization, but instead we practice communicating with clarity so everyone understands our role, how they fit in, and what we're doing together. Also increase flexibility. There's new models of micro volunteering. And we saw that a lot, especially in Minnesota in the United States during Operation Metro Surge, where mutual aid emerged, which can benefit a variety of people from different populations. It's also important to deepen trust. It's important to address historical harms and power imbalances by creating a culture of belonging that makes every volunteer, every community member feel valued and seen. And I'll end by just saying that redesigning your organization through this lens isn't about doing the right thing for a specific group. It's about building a more resilient, effective, and human-centered system for every person who wants to serve. Tailoring really requires dismantling hidden barriers, things that those of us who are able-bodied who are people without disabilities, who we speak English first, right? We don't always see the barriers. So it's really important that we take time to lean into understanding how do we create flexibility? How do we stop assuming that volunteers are available during a weekday or that they have reliable transportation? All of these things can help us, again, create the vibrant, connected communities we all want to see.
Thank you so much for that, Naila, and we really appreciate that. That's a very strong start to the panel for us. Allison, building on to that, from your experience managing large AmeriCorps programs, what are the key systems and processes nonprofits need to build to ensure that they have a strong volunteer infrastructure, starting from recruitment to retention, which retention is usually harder. Recruitment, people might be okay coming over one weekend, but how do we go from recruitment to retention?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kasuma. And Nyla's always a hard person to follow. So thanks for setting the bar so high, Nyla. But really happy to be here with you all. And from my experience in national service and volunteer engagement, I'm a really big fan of applying volunteer engagement principles and practices to AmeriCorps program. So if folks on the call are like, oh, I operate an AmeriCorps program and I can't find AmeriCorps specific resources, I highly recommend looking at volunteer engagement principles and practices as a starting point and then using those and integrating and weaving in all of your federal requirements. And one of my favorite resources when I'm talking about volunteer infrastructure is the Council for Certification in Volunteer Administration. I also am a CVA, and I hold that certificate. And along with that comes the body of knowledge and competencies, which is my absolute favorite resource in volunteer engagement. It's a resource list that lists 7 competencies and 67 tasks that are specific to volunteer engagement. So it goes through and it talks about all of the different processes and all of the different systems that are, again, specific to volunteer engagement. So it's not talking about like how to use AI or how to do things that cross different sectors. It's really specific to volunteer engagement. And so for folks who are looking to make adjustments or to make investments in their own infrastructure, looking at that resource can be really, really helpful because it gets specific. There's a book that can go along with it if you're really looking for some investment. But to call out a few key systems specifically around strong volunteer infrastructure, I think risk management is one of those things because inevitably something goes wrong. And thinking about that on the front end and how you'll process or have folks come to you with risks or complaints ahead of time is very helpful to help keep calm in the moment when you might be facing a situation. The second is the ongoing recognition of volunteers. And I had a colleague during a training once say that they kept notes around how specific volunteers liked to be acknowledged and recognized because there are folks that are like, they'll take the handwritten thank you note, and that's all that they want. They don't want to be publicly recognized. They don't want to receive a governor's award of service. They don't want to be on your website. But then there are those people on the other hand that are very much into the more public recognition, and neither one is more good than the other. They're just different kind of languages around recognition. And recognition is a tactic to retaining volunteers, but it shouldn't be the sole responsibility of the volunteer manager or the volunteer management team. It needs to be an organization-wide strategy for folks who are working with volunteers, or they see them if you have an office, like thanking them or having different tactics that again speaks to different, I'm going to call them volunteer love languages here in the moment. But I think it's a really great way to help retain volunteers by just simply acknowledging their contributions. But then on the flip side, I think it's also deeper than individual contributions. It's what have volunteer-driven initiatives done for an organization, and what have volunteer initiatives done for the community, and celebrating those as well. So kind of like that 3 pillars all around impact, around the volunteer, for the organization, and the community. And then the third system that I'll mention for infrastructure is having a plan for offboarding or separating with volunteers, because someone's not going to volunteer with you forever, and that's okay. And it can be a volunteer initiated separation, or it can be an organization initiated separation. And having that infrastructure now will help you figure out if it should be an organization initiated separation, or what you do when a volunteer is ready to offboard.
Great, that's interesting. And the last part is very striking to me. So I might come back to you about that. Definitely. Um, Kate, following up on that, you've spent many years helping local organizations build and strengthen AmeriCorps programs. So, from that particular lens, how do you think nonprofits can make sure that service programs are responding to a community's actual priorities, rather than bringing in solutions that were probably designed elsewhere, and you're trying to like fit into this lane kind of thing?
Yeah, that is probably the key question of everything that we do at our commission. That's the root of it. So as a state service commission, our role is as a funder. Our primary customer, if you will, is a nonprofit organization or an agency or a tribe that's applying for funds. So to Ally's point about putting structures in place ahead of time to make sure like that what you're doing is relevant and is going to be impactful in the way that you need it to be. We put a lot of legwork into that side. I'm a systems person. I'm a big fan of Peter Senge and his fifth discipline. So we tend to look for organizations that are trying to implement upriver solutions. So, not kind of the last end of the symptoms of a problem and putting a band-aid on that, but we're looking for people who are looking upriver to either the root of the problem that they're trying to address, or a key benchmark somewhere on that river where the river forks and there's a path that's better than the other for the community. And so when we're engaging applicants, we're really looking for them to be experts in their field and in their community, and they need to instruct us. We are providers of structure and we are providers of resource, but we are looking to you to tell us who your community is, what the gaps are in obstacles to them getting to what they envision for themselves that you are facilitating, and that needs to be the point of view. um, and in AmeriCorps there's a real a focus on evidence informed programming, evidence based programming, which is different thresholds of what that means. um, and so it's not necessarily that the solution or the intervention can't be derived elsewhere. There's a big sharing of work. If some other community has successfully delivered an intervention and it has been successful in their place, we can leverage that in our community, but we can't just rubber stamp it in our community. We have to work with the community, our applicants. Our applicants are expected to work with their local stakeholders, including, and most importantly, the recipients of service, to make the case that this is a true need, that all of these other surrounding efforts are trying to address it, and somewhere in there is a hole that needs to be filled, and that national service strategy could be an effective tool to fill it. And then we work with the applicant to do what Ally described, which is, okay, how do we marry these two things? And sometimes it's an excellent fit, and sometimes it's not. And that's also part of our job, is to say, you know what, national service is maybe not the strategy for this. Maybe there's a better volunteer approach or a better partnership with other organizations or some other way to address the problem. The other thing I wanted to mention on this subject is that we notice that the programs that tend to thrive in our ecosystem are the ones that demonstrate the most willingness to question their understanding of a problem as it moves, to reconsider their strategies, to flex with data as it changes, because not only conditions can change, but also our perception of conditions can change. And also what we know or think we know about what the best approach is can also change and evolve. So we look for organizations that understand who they are and what their mission is in the community, but also can adjust course without deviating from who they are, right? We don't want them to chase national service funds. We want them to leverage them in a way that fits. So that's how we approach it.
Kusuma,
Oh,
you're on mute.
Sorry. No, that's wonderful. No, I was just saying I didn't learn of Peter Senge and the fifth principle previously. So I will definitely look into that. Looks like that's a great framework and a model to check out. And, these questions, I'll just try to make sure it's kind of slowly cross panel and this is about from volunteers to impact. Naila, for example, many nonprofits want to engage with a more diverse group of volunteers. And from your experience, where do you see organizations either being successful or struggling in their volunteer systems and processes in this effort? And what changes need to be made to ensure that this is more, I think, uh, everyone wants to be inclusive. Most of them want to be inclusive, but how can we make sure that this changes? How can organizations change a little?
Thank you so much for this question. And before I jump into the response, I just have to celebrate my panelists. I'm over here taking copious notes. I love your approach to the work. Right, that's why we're here, to really help inform on a larger platform of just how we can do things differently together. And I will call out a friend of mine, Brianna Derelius, who really talks about co-dreaming. Right? It's important that we dream together, that we don't just rest on the foundations that have been created and handed over to us, right? That yes, there are some really great benefits that come with tradition, that come with doing things that have gone well. But also there are things that we continue to carry forward that are not serving us, they're not serving our communities. And to your point, Kate, we're not taking a lot of time to sit back and think about how can we change these to be more equitable? How can we think about shifting the things that we're already doing in a direction that centers the people who maybe aren't at the table? And how do we create more seats at that table to invite people who we purport to serve, right? A lot of organizations want to expand and diversify their volunteer workforce, but how they approach it is not rooted in centering the people that they want to serve. And so as organizations struggle to engage volunteers that reflect the diversity of their communities, in response, during my time as MAVA's leader, we conducted research resulting in 8 strategies in fostering inclusivity in volunteer programs. Because we know that organizations struggle most because they treat diversity as a recruitment target rather than an operational audit of systems, originally designed by and for privileged groups, right? A lot of the people in community that organizations want to serve, they weren't at the table when the systems were being created. They weren't at the table when the procedures were being nailed down into being standard operating procedures. They weren't invited. But now there's an expectation that people are eager to jump into your volunteer program that was never designed for them, right? So I think we all have to just take a step back, zoom out, and really consider who was at the table or who was missing at the table as we continue to redesign, look forward, vision cast, and dream. And so really true inclusion requires dismantling legacy barriers embedded in how we screen, schedule, and retain people. So a few tips that have come out of MAVA's research is around shifting your language. The term volunteerism is often used to describe formal volunteering. Informal volunteerism is more prevalent in communities of color and immigrant communities, right? They don't call themselves volunteers. They call each other neighbors. They call each other friends, right? These communities see service as helping, not volunteering. And when working with diverse communities, or when you are eager to be a part of working with a diverse community, think about using words beyond volunteer. Helping is a good option. Support, benefit, give. But let's be honest, friends, before we even get to the point of wanting to engage someone in a different community to volunteer, it's important for you to be present and trusted. You can't just show up in a community and assume that they want to be a part of your organization or work with you. I'm sure you're great. I'm sure you do fantastic things, right? Everybody wants to be your friend. But the reality is, trust must be built. Because if they can't trust you, why would they be retained? Why would they continue beyond that one-day event, Kasuma, like you asked about, right? How do we get people to stay? And trust is a major component in staying. Also, removing barriers. I think I mentioned this earlier, right? If you're able-bodied, if English is your first language, you may not see some of the barriers that others may experience. And inclusion requires constantly looking for and removing hidden barriers that prevent some people from fully participating. They include background checks, punitive policies, English fluency. So one thing that a lot of organizations could consider doing is create the infrastructure to engage non-English speakers, right? Instead of expecting someone who English is their second language to assimilate into your procedures, your way of work, how about you actually create an on-ramp for them to feel a space of welcoming and belonging? Also, review your current policies with an equity lens. There are actually organizations out there that you can hire that will review your policies, your procedures, your websites with a lens of equity to determine, is there harm that's being created that you don't even know about, right? Because when you come from a perspective of privilege, there are things that you don't consider to be harmful that could 100% be preventing people from seeing themselves at your organization. Also, of course, we want to protect our youth and our most vulnerable populations. But if those aren't your clientele, really assess, why do you need a background check? Or if you must have a background check system, maybe consider one that doesn't require a social security number, because there are people who reside in the United States and of course across the world who may not have this documentation, which is another area of exclusion from participation. And the last piece is, don't invite people to the party if you haven't created the party for them. So it's important to think about creating inclusion at the organizational cultural level, right? You can influence an environment where volunteers of all ethnicities and backgrounds feel welcome and included. And that's the key to retaining diverse volunteers. So encourage your colleagues across departments to learn and unlearn. What are things that are embedded in how they do their work? That's, maybe it's a time for them to unlearn that and try something new, right? Ask the leaders to communicate messages of inclusion to staff and volunteers so they know that it's a priority for everyone. Be intentional about making your volunteer program more welcoming, right? What's in your control? What can you manage? What can you level up? Offer cultural competency training for volunteers, because they're your front lines. They're your people, right? And you want them to represent your organization in a way that is also inviting and welcoming. And then lastly, go inward and prioritize your own professional development and cultural competency, because you can come from a place of great intention, but what is the lasting piece is the impact that you make. So people aren't going to think about how well you showed up with that big smile on your face. They're going to think about, how did they feel while they were in your presence? So there's a lot of ways that you can transform a culture from maybe not recognizing opportunity to being more inclusive. And I really invite you all to take at least that first step in thinking about how you can do that where you are today.
That's amazing, Naila. And I love the premise that you said we need to co-dream, so that I think that sets a vantage point where we understand where everyone is coming from. And I think that sets a stage for a different line of thinking than the one that we've either grown up with or, built towards over time. And I really love what you mentioned so far about including, non-English speakers, creating a way for them and everything else. And that's true. In a multicultural society, I think evaluating anyone's, what do you say, anyone's competence or anyone's need for help or anything based on one language is not something that is helpful
Right.
for society. So, from that particular lens, Alison, the next question is to you. Volunteer engagement often depends on infrastructure that individual nonprofits may not have the resources to build on their own, because it depends on various things, the size of the nonprofit, the number of people they have, and everything else. So, what kind of public investment or shared infrastructure would make the biggest difference to ensure that individual nonprofits also have some sustainable infrastructure?
Yes, thanks for the question, Kasuma. I think this is my favorite question out of the list for me, and I could probably talk about this for hours. But to keep it as an overview, I think it's important to acknowledge that there is a lot of things happening in the service, volunteer engagement, volunteerism space, like now, with the unveiling of the National Volunteer Strategy for the United States, the National Governors Associations. The new chair was installed at the beginning of the month, and his chair's initiative is called the Service United, where there's a call for governors to help service and volunteerism in each of their states in a variety of manners. There's lots of things happening around public policy and around other items in volunteer engagement. So there's just a lot happening, and it can be somewhat overwhelming. But I think to start off with, if folks can get involved with those who are advocating for stronger, more robust public investments, is an easy first step. There's points of light. Here at America's Service Commissions, we have a privately funded public policy arm called the States for Service Coalition, and we lead an annual sign-on letter that requests more robust congressional appropriations for the Volunteer Generation Fund. And the Volunteer Generation Fund is the only federal source that's specifically focused on building volunteer infrastructure. So whether that's getting a volunteer connector website or paying for staff time or building up programs, that's what the Volunteer Generation Fund is for. And it is vastly underfunded at the federal level. So happy to share information about that with you, Kasuma, so you can share it out. But I think that joining in efforts that are already happening is one easy step. Another example of this would be there is an initiative to get the mileage reimbursement for volunteers increased up from 19 cents per mile to a much higher rate. And so like there's different initiatives depending on where you see kind of what jives with your organization's priorities as well. Another option is, or I think another infrastructure item is to leverage low barrier shared infrastructure. So when we look at state commissions, specifically state service commissions, many of them, not all, but many do host volunteer connector websites that are open for nonprofits in the area to post on for free or low cost. There's local associations and nonprofit associations where folks can post their opportunities or get involved in coalitions. And I think that that's another great strategy for folks to use, is to come together with folks who have shared vision or shared opportunities to then build up a louder coalition. To kind of dovetail is kind of what Nyla was speaking about earlier, and Kate as well, is one of the best things I ever learned in my work was that I don't always have to start at square one. There's so many resources out there and available to look at, particularly in volunteer engagement. Like Nyla mentioned, Brianna, there's lots of other colleagues in the space that share things for free on LinkedIn. You can take their courses for what I would consider a low barrier amount of money. There are more intensive things, but you don't always have to start at square one. There are lots of best practices that are shared. templates that you can rework to fit your own need. And lots of folks that are volunteer engagement professionals who are willing to step in and provide insights or answer questions, whether that be through email or on LinkedIn. I think that there's a lot of ways for folks to find shared infrastructure, even on a more micro level, which could, for example, be I really want to have a form that talks about past volunteer experience or anything like that. So like, does someone already have that out there so you're not having to think of all of the blanks or all of the fields that you're wanting to ask. So if you're looking for some of those types of things, I recommend checking out the CCVA, the Council for Certification and Volunteer Administration, Alive, which is the national association here in the US, which is the Association for Leaders in Volunteer Engagement. MAVA has a bunch of resources, state service commissions, even if it's not your own commission. I welcome you to seek out resources from Volunteer Iowa, Serve Ohio, Volunteer Florida. There are some commissions who have a lot of great resources available for free that you can use as a starting point. And I'll end my remarks about this question with a call to action to organizations because I think it's really important. It's imperative to invest in your own infrastructure, even with limited resources around your systems and your staff specifically who are responsible for volunteer engagement. Tools, looking at tools like the Service Enterprise, which is a certification that organizations can go through to get recognition about how they utilize volunteers, and it's a change management system. And the continued professional development and investment in volunteer managers or those staff who are responsible for volunteer engagement is exceptionally important. Volunteer engagement is a profession and we must treat it like that. And part of that is recognizing what is a an organization need and it must invest in its own folks. And I think it's also looking at how do you include volunteer engagement strategies across your organization, or if you're applying for grants, how do you weave in volunteer engagement into your application around getting your healthcare organization funded? Like talking about how you're going to use volunteers in those ways, I think is all strategies that organizations have ownership that will build up their infrastructure even on a limited resource basis.
No, that's amazing, Ali. And I think we will take you up on, looking at those resources. Anything that any of you can share with us, we'll be very happy to go through those. And I think one of the next questions is for Kate. Kate, since, you have worked with several nonprofits, how do you think many smaller nonprofits who want to participate in national service programs uh, who may not have the staff capacity or experience navigate this process? And what kinds of support systems do you think can help these organizations participate successfully?
That is such a good question. And again, really core to my job. I have this conversation multiple times a week, every week. Um, our point of view, I mean, the whole idea of AmeriCorps is that it's a public-private partnership. So you have this massive federal government structure and a giant amount of resources that is designed in several different ways to filter down. And then you have this state presence that takes the form of a state service commission to take a part of those resources and really drill down to the needs of their individual state and the organizations and the people that reside there. So it is built to tailor to, it is built to provide access to a very large thing to the local level. And our point of view on smaller organizations in our state is that they are the front line of understanding in our communities. I think I don't know what the percentage is, but so many of the much smaller organizations are often derived of people who have experienced challenges in our communities, and they have addressed it, and they have started this nonprofit because they want to share their understanding, share their challenges, work with other people to solve it, so that they are hopefully one of the last people to endure whatever challenge they've been through. So that point of view is really important. But we also, in my chair, have to acknowledge that this system that we are working with, AmeriCorps, is huge. It is daunting. It is, to its credit and its challenge, really structured with regulations. The scale of it is very large. The model is not rocket science complex, but certainly if you are a nonprofit and you say, we have this glaring need in our community, we feel like we are equipped and positioned to deal with it, but we don't know how to get into this system. We acknowledge that, and so our work as state service commissions is to bridge that. I think that's the way we view our role, is to make the seemingly inaccessible accessible. We recently ran a training for the program managers, and this goes back to what Allie was just saying, who run our programs. We had an orientation session, and we were really talking about this capacity issue, that volunteer engagement folks, and if you are seeking national service resources, running a national service program is a profession, and it is a uniquely challenging profession, because you're not just a manager and like in a traditional job role where you are hiring someone and then they stay with you forever. You are cycle after cycle recruiting people, trying to get them to believe in what you are doing, trying to see if their wishes and hopes and desires align with that, if they're a good fit. And then your job is to keep them there every day, give them a reason to stay, make sure that that party that Nyla was describing is in effect every day so that they want to show up. And so the folks that are recruited into national service, the managees, they have to learn the organization, embed in your organization, learn your community, or maybe they come from that community and they are seeing it in a different light, from a different perspective. They have to learn how to deploy the intervention you've designed. They have to collect data on what they're doing and report what their impact is. And then they move on. And hopefully you have created an experience that gives them value beyond that. So it's a huge undertaking. And if it's done well, it's brief and it's intense, this relationship, but it's meant to create impact for the community. And it can be profoundly fulfilling and impact the rest of that person's life in a memorable way. That is scary. That is scary responsibility to take on. The plus side of all of that, and what I try to emphasize, is that, yeah, it's very, very powerful if it's done well. So you have access to resources that can really move mountains. It also is very structured. So we as a service commission are not going to let you move into this space unless we have helped you make sure that you are ready to do this, that you have the tools that you need. And to Allie's point, this is an extremely sharing community. We are constantly sharing resources. It's our whole mission. So we're by the side, and there's a tricky relationship. We're funders, so we have to be stewards of these funds, but we also want to set you up for success, and we also want to be honest with you if you're not ready. So tapping in for smaller organizations, there are different financial investments attached to national service. Some are small financial investments, some are large. They all require capacity investment, to Ali's point earlier, but that can differ too. Depending on the funding stream that you're working with. There are longer term commitments. There are short term commitments. Maybe you need a quick infiltration of assistance and you go with the National Civilian Conservation Corps. Or maybe you need a longer term with somebody who's going to help your organization build your capacity. So you engage with AmeriCorps Vista. Or maybe you just need a team of people deployed in your community to deliver something at scale. And that's where AmeriCorps Seniors and my program, AmeriCorps State and National, come in. So we work with you to kind of tailor what the approach would be based on your size, based on what you're trying to do in the community, based on who you're trying to reach. You can also work with organizations that are already in the sector. I mean, we have lots of national and state-based organizations that do. You can just host a member or host a Vista and get that intervention on a smaller scale. You can become an operational site for a larger program that does all the burden of the compliance and the administration. And your piece is just receiving the help, caring for the help, and collecting the benefit there. And then on a local level, we really promote intermediary programs, which if you're a small organization, you can join forces with other organizations in your local community. And one of you is positioned to take that fiduciary responsibility for the National Service Funds, but you all work together to disperse the responsibility for the program administration. That is hard. That's a lot of coordination, but it also makes the resource accessible to you. The last thing I will say is many commissions, and we certainly do, offer planning grants to organizations. And it's a year long. You have funding for a person, whether it's a person in your organization or a consultant, and some expenses to spend a year working through a curriculum and developing a concept for an AmeriCorps program. As a state service commission, that is really focused on that AmeriCorps state model where you have a large core, but a viable result from that can be you determine we're trying to design a core, but you know what? This is really a Vista project. Or we're trying to design a national service program and it's really just a volunteer program and we need to structure it less formally. And then we provide training and technical assistance outside of that all the time. So we have an open door policy there.
That's amazing. So this is an open-ended question now because I was just thinking through. With all this work, where do you see opportunities, I think, for the corporate sector or just for other companies to connect their employees, like professional skills or, the corporate time that they can usually spend in terms of serving the community needs through volunteering? And any of you have any experiences working in that particular sector? It's just an open-ended question, so.
I love that question because, right, it creates an on-ramp for people who maybe never thought that their corporate skill set or their academic skill set could be useful in the nonprofit ecosystem. And I think that nonprofits who can really wrap their arms around what do we actually need for our organization to be successful or to evolve, then you can start identifying where are specific skills that you'd like to bring to the organization. And that's where corporate volunteerism, episodic volunteerism can really lend to skill-based volunteers, right? So maybe during your day job, you're a financial analyst or advisor, and you just can't figure out what's the transferable skill to volunteerism. Well, there's definitely one, right? If you can bring in that lens of supporting organizations and having fiscal governance, looking at how well are they able to manage their finances, what are they planning in future years they may need a capital fund for, right? These are all ways that people who have some type of financial background can lean into supporting nonprofit sustainability and growth. So, or if you're in marketing, right, you love designing and creating and you're great at communicating. These are all of the ways that you could lend your expertise or your skill set to an organization and really, again, help them level up and evolve in a way that they wouldn't have been able to because maybe they couldn't afford to bring on someone full time, or maybe they, don't have the capacity to add another list of responsibility to a current staff. But having someone who has the skill set, who's ready to go. And then another important thing we learned through our research is having clearly defined timelines, right? Because just because you say yes doesn't mean you want to say yes for 5 or 10 years. Maybe you want to say yes for 6 months, right? And making it clear that opportunities with a variety of timelines are acceptable at your organization can really invite people in who maybe never saw themselves doing that important work.
No, that's amazing, Naila. That actually reminds me there is this organization called DataKind. And when the pandemic hit, we had so many of those PPP loans go out. So DataKind takes volunteer data scientists, and I was one of those volunteer data scientists. Like I had a job, but you just volunteer to help smaller nonprofits, like you said, the ones that do not have the kind of capacity or resources at the time, distill data and make sure that they can use it. So definitely, and even from a Sewa standpoint, like we have our VP of technology who works with Amazon in a similar capacity, and we also have several other people. He's the first one that came to my mind. We also have our VP of marketing and fund development, I think, who's on our call as well, Nikhil ji, who volunteers in a similar and a much broader capacity. So we really love engaging that way. And I think just we have some more time, so I'll also ask a few questions that we have from our audience to start with. One thing I think we've had a question here is, what are some effective ways to engage student volunteers so that they can see volunteering as more than just a way to complete their required service hours?
I can jump in here. There's some really great research on how young people are viewing like traditional volunteerism or like what we as a field would view as volunteer service. The research was done by the Allstate Foundation 2 years ago, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago. And essentially, the Cliff Notes version of the research is that young people in particular view service much differently than older generations. And so they're engaging and interacting with service in a completely different way, which is okay. But we as practitioners and we as volunteer engagement professionals, we have to change our own ways of seeking those young people to be volunteers. So young people are looking for generally like meaningful, impactful service. So some of our more what I would consider traditional volunteer roles or what long-standing roles organizations are looking for, young people may not necessarily find that meaningful and impactful, which is okay. Two things can be true. You can need that volunteer opportunity, and someone can decide that that's not for them. But then, like, how do you meet in the middle by offering diverse or different volunteer opportunities that are appealing to young people? There's research around how young people view alternative ways to engage, whether that's like with their peers on social media or their peers at school, or they can talk about an organization and its mission and how they relate to that organization. And that's actually, in their eyes, a form of helping and with service. And so, like, how can you take that as an organization and say, that's wonderful, like we should start a teen ambassador program where we talk about our organization and our program to young people, and then they tell their friends about it. Or young people are have very high participation in informal helping, like Nyla was talking about earlier, where they're helping their neighbors, they're helping their siblings, they're helping their community, and we don't necessarily count that as volunteerism because it's not being done at a formal organization. And so I challenge folks, if you're wanting to engage young people and you're not seeing that, ask some young people that you know, how could we get you to come and volunteer, or what types of roles would you want to volunteer in? And then take those into consideration when you're looking at new or innovative ways that you can interact with young people, specifically at your organization.
And if I could also follow up, double click, like everything that Allie just said, but I wanted to weave in two other things that I'm really passionate about, and that's about starting volunteerism early, right? We talk about high schoolers, we talk about the credits that they earn. I'm a big proponent of starting as soon as kids can identify things that they're interested in. So even, right, a 5 or 6 year old, making space for family volunteering at your organization can really build a pipeline for future volunteerism, right? Because they're gaining the passion, the interest, the excitement around service at a young age. So it really informs them as they're growing and shaping into who they become, that service will be an integral part of what they do, regardless of where they do it. So that's one point. And the other is, through our research around generations at MAVA, we found that Gen Z and millennials, it's really important for them to see that an organization is about inclusion. So before you even engage them and invite them to volunteer, they're looking at your website, they're looking at your social media, they're doing their own research on who you are and how you're showing up in community. And if you are not an organization that is practicing inclusion, that is welcoming people of all ages, races, different identities, they may not see themselves as a young person who wants to volunteer with you. So it's really about, how are you presenting yourself externally to community, and what offerings are you making available for any age level to be a part of your work. Now, of course, there are some other things that come along with that, depending on the age. If they're younger than 16, you need to have an adult present. You need to make sure that you have risk management, different policies in place, right? You can't just go showing up to the second grade class and saying, hey, you want to come volunteer at my garden, right? Might be a little creepy, but making sure that there's infrastructure in place to invite, welcome, and have age appropriate opportunities for service. I see a future where young people are excited to volunteer. They gather their friends for service when opportunities arise, right? And that is the future that we can create if we're intentional about what we offer today.
May I add to this conversation too?
Yes.
I've been working with youth in our state for a few years as we build our intentional engagement with youth. And I also happen to be the parent of 5 individuals, and 3 of them are Gen Z, and 2 of them are very young millennials. And what I have noticed is, and I'm going to generalize slightly, but I think this is pretty. I think it bears out in the research that Allstate did as well, is there is a search for authenticity and truth in service. And if they get a whiff of insincerity in the ask, it is a no-go. And so and volunteers of all ages can feel this. There's a difference between an organization creating a perception that they are seeking free labor versus engaging human beings in their mission and finding value in what those individuals contribute to that mission and growing their mission with that energy. People can feel that, and they don't have to be adults to sense it. There's also an attitude around things like board memberships, advisory councils. All of those are often promoted as a privilege and an honor bestowed upon the volunteer, but they are still volunteer experiences. They still are time and energy and thought that people are bringing to the table. And if you are focused on the fact that they should have gratitude for the honor instead of having gratitude for what they bring, people can sense that too, and they can sense it at a young age. So I think it's about being mindful that these are whole human beings with something to contribute who are living in this world and are impacted by this world now. And that's the approach that they are going to resonate with if they feel like you really get that.
No, that's true actually, and I think on that end, these are my questions, and I'm going with that first. For example, digital volunteering has also seen a rise because it removes geography as a barrier, and probably it also has the opportunity to remove some other demographic constraints as a barrier. Sometimes when people don't see, they don't know. Uh, which ethnicity are you from, or which location are you from, several other things, nuances that get into picture. So how do you see this based on digital access? Like, do you think that as well volunteering becomes more virtual, you see that there can be more inclusion, or do you still see that someone can quietly be left behind? And also, if it becomes more remote, is there a risk of it becoming more transactional? And do we risk those relationships that we usually talk about within the community, which is what volunteering is intended to build at the end of the day?
I'll quickly jump in and share that post-COVID, we did a lot of reflection and thinking about how can we shift volunteerism, especially when it felt like volunteerism kind of went away during COVID. And what bubbled to the top was virtual volunteering. And a lot of organizations saw this as an opportunity to create a new lane of volunteering from the traditional methods. But I think where we quickly learned the challenges of virtual volunteerism is that volunteerism itself solves for so many things, right? Being in community with people, and especially post-COVID, so many people were lonely. And even though virtual volunteerism may have filled that gap of providing a service or feeling like you're doing a good, it wasn't really serving the whole person as an in-person opportunity would. So we still see an uptick in virtual volunteerism opportunities, which can maybe be more rooted in like technical or technology-based volunteering opportunities. But really, when people are going to sign up to volunteer, they want to be with others. They want to be in community. They want to build relationships. And so I think that's where there's still opportunity to think about how do we enhance virtual volunteering for those that it works well for, that it's suited for, because I feel like in a way they have been left behind. It's here's your assignment. I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. And I'll say I did have an experience like that with one of the platforms where you can submit your volunteer needs, and anyone from around the country or the world actually can say, yes, I'd love to do this with you. And we partnered with a young lady who was in Nigeria, and
Mhm.
she did tremendous work for us, working on our volunteer CRM. Uh, but I think that the challenge that arose was she felt like it was just an assignment, right? There wasn't, even though we made opportunities for Zoom calls and to tap in and to share our appreciation, it just didn't feel quite the same. So I think that's a lever that we in the volunteer engagement world need to figure out how to shift from feeling more transactional to feeling more relational, like we've done, I think, so well in other areas of volunteerism.
Okay. If anyone else, yeah.
Yeah, I also think that um, from my sphere, again in the youth service space, we work with a program called Interview that we're using it to engage with high school students. And it's a very simple way for them to track all of the different volunteer work and helping that they do, informal, formal, it all counts. And then we have a service award that we're offering as a commission, but ideally it's to build that kind of culture of service in them. And one of the things that I love about it is that there are virtual service opportunities as an access point to causes that may not have local iterations of volunteer work. So, for example, here we are on the coastline of Connecticut, but maybe this individual really cares about the Grand Canyon. We don't have canyons in Connecticut. You know, we don't have earthquake fault lines. We don't have hurricanes very often in Connecticut. So disaster services looks much different here than it looks elsewhere. But maybe they have a real passion around forest fires, you know. So it gives that nice access point to somebody who can marry passion with something that isn't available locally. So that is one thing that I really love about it.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, I'll ask the next audience question. Is there anything that the government can do to help smaller nonprofits build volunteer systems for effective onboarding, retention, and maximum impact?
Kate and I are staring at each other to see which of us is gonna unmute first. I'll do it. It's fine.
Who's going to say fund VGF?
Yes. So in talking in a AmeriCorps volunteer, AmeriCorps member space, the most direct route is for an increased appropriation for Congress to direct more federal dollars to the Volunteer Generation Fund, which is a program of the AmeriCorps agency, the federal agency on national and community service. Um, it's I can give my whole spiel about VGF, so I'll give you the lighter version. It's currently funded at about $8.5 million. It is authorized by Congress to receive up to $100 million every year, which would then be up for a grant opportunity for big nonprofits, small nonprofits, state service commissions to apply for, to then have those dollars for strictly volunteer engagement capacity building. So again, like that could be staff time, that can be funding strategies for a better volunteer program. It's not like let's buy pizza for our volunteers and celebrate them. It's deeper than that, and so that is really the main strategy. I think there's other ways that folks, if you are a federal grantee, you can weave volunteer engagement into if you're a federally funded hospital, weaving volunteer engagement into that type of grant is also doable. But specifically speaking about volunteer engagement, the Volunteer Generation Fund is the only federal source of funding that is available for volunteer engagement capacity building. And I'm happy to send you, Kasuma, our sign-on letter when we work on it at the beginning of 2027, we normally work at the beginning of the year, so that we can circulate it ahead of when appropriators are talking about each of the federal fiscal year budgets.
Oh, we would love that. Thank you so much, Johnny. And again, the next audience question: how can organizations create meaningful opportunities for volunteers to share ideas and suggestions and ensure that their input can contribute to the organization's impact? And
Kasuma, will you repeat the question?
definitely. How can organizations create meaningful opportunities for volunteers to share ideas and suggestions? I think the question is predominantly about, for example, if someone is a volunteer, they're an outside entity, and volunteering is probably considered to be for the event, or for a course of events and things like that. But they're asking if volunteers, like, how can they have the opportunity to share their ideas and suggestions, and what can organizations do to ensure that they can incorporate or involve them in the discussion process, I guess.
Sure. So I encourage folks to have like evaluation surveys or feedback forms for volunteers to fill out about their experiences, whether that's an episodic volunteer who's just joining you for one day, or if that's someone who has an ongoing volunteering relationship with you. Asking for their feedback, I think, is really important. So then you can take that into consideration and make changes or upgrades to what you're doing. I also think that having like advisory councils or task force or even volunteers on your board, so like having constituents, folks who receive your services on your board, and also folks who are volunteering with you, I think is also an important step that organizations could take. But definitely having some sort of evaluation feedback loop is, I think, essential for volunteering organizations.
Okay. No, fair
And
enough.
thank you for kicking us off, Allie. You really helped to stir up a reminder to me. So in my previous work life with another organization, before we recognized the challenges that were in the community, but rather than sitting around our boardroom table and thinking about what the solutions would be, we created space for community to be invited in to discuss and to even ask, like, the problems we've identified, did we get that right? Right? Because we could be centered on problems that we think are problems, but you may say, listen, for example, public safety, we're so focused on, right, reducing violence, which is really important. But what community brought forward is we actually want sidewalks and lighting. Like, we actually want to be able to walk on the street and feel safe. So there are things that will be elevated through community conversation if you can curate and create the space again, so people can feel invited into the party. They want to be at the party and they want to share. But I think another important part that sometimes organizations miss, because we don't always have the resources, is that if you're going to invite and solicit insights from community, you should also pay community for those insights, right? You in a lot of way, you're extracting information that you benefit from, right? Ultimately, the community may and should benefit from you gathering these insights, but ultimately, you would not have been able to reach the understanding or target your research or target your capacity without those insights. And so recognizing that they are valued and valuable, you do that through creating space where you can provide some type of compensation for their volunteer insights and experience. So it's a both and. It's also invite them, welcome them in, create the space, but also value their time and experience with compensation.
No, that's interesting.
I would too that I think orientation is really important at the outset, not to make sure you're designing a volunteer perception of your volunteer experience in your organization, but to make sure that as they have their volunteer experience, they have context for why they're there. What are they doing? How does what they do contribute to what you're trying to do in the community? Why are you there? What does the community look like? Um, because it is a very painful experience to later in a service year or in a volunteer experience to have a conversation with someone who's having a hard time in their volunteer experience because they didn't know a resource was available. They didn't know they could have some kind of intervention earlier in their service experience that might have come down to a misunderstanding or just a lack of knowledge about what the program is or how it's structured. So having that context setting up front then sets up later feedback loops to be based in like a shared understanding as opposed to illuminating something that was just a missed message.
Yeah, fair enough. So 1 minute, I'm just trying to make sure. I think one of the other questions that I had is, Naila, I think we'll start with you. Looking ahead, what is one change that nonprofits should make to create more inclusive and meaningful volunteer experiences?
I really appreciate um, you making space for this question, because this should be something that volunteer engagement leaders, professionals, people who are really leading the strategy and the vision of nonprofits that serve the community, it should be something they think about consistently. It shouldn't be a one time a year or every 3 years that you think about how can we. And one thing that I really like to encourage, and I like to say in all of the spaces that I am, is that it's important to move at the speed of the community that you serve and to center the lived experience of the people that you serve. By practicing these two things in all of your initiatives and all of the ways that you show up, all of the strategies that you are aiming to put in place will really help you to stay aligned and in relationship with community. And as I mentioned earlier, right, we can sit around the boardroom table and we can make decisions for community and the people we serve, or we can move to people-centered practices and bring the people to the table to guide and inform decision-making about them. And I do want to leave you all with this important South African slogan that nothing about us without us is for us. And community recognizes that. When you come up with a brand new initiative, a brand new project, a brand new volunteer program, and they know that no one in the community or no one who looks like them was included in the development and the design, you really started off in a place where you may be operating this and it's going to take so much longer to get it to the finish line because of the trust that was never built. So I think that really cross the nonprofit infrastructure, we really need to start thinking about how do we have accountabilities that are centered on relationship building, right? We measure everything else. We measure numbers, we measure time, we measure people, we measure impact, but we're not measuring relationship building, which is why I think we continue to be positioned where people may trust the people at the organization, but they don't trust the organization. So how can we build so that people trust both the people at the organization and the organization itself? So as the people leave, community still wants to be a part of the work, because I wasn't brought here because I think Nyla is fantastic. I mean, even though Nyla might be fantastic, right? I stay
Absolutely.
here because the organization is fantastic, because the work that we're doing collaboratively is fantastic. So it's a high bar, but I think that if you can build the steps to get to that high bar, wow, right? Wow. The relationships, the connectivity, the synergy, all of these pieces can come together naturally and organically in a way that, again, creates more vibrant communities.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Naila. That was a lot of strength that you brought to the conversation, and I know that you have a previous commitment and that you need to drop off. So we really, really appreciate you joining us this morning and probably afternoon in a few time zones. And we look forward to working with you and your organization anywhere that you are at now and in the future. And we will continue the conversation with Ali and Kate.
Thank you, Sewa International. Thank you, Kasuma. Thank you, President of Sewa International United States. This has been such a tremendously beautiful conversation. And I do wish that I can stay longer, but I'm sure that Kate and Allie will carry this conversation forward with my spirit in mind. So again, thank you so, so very much. And everyone, please enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Naila. So I think one question that hung up on me, Kate, was about something that you mentioned previously. You were mentioning that youth, I mean, we specifically spoke about youth, that youth actually look at the kind of volunteerism that they can be a part of. Because like you said, I might care about the Grand Canyon, but then I also love to live in the East Coast. So, how can I do both at the same time? So how do you think, like, so is it a problem of non because we also often hear about nonprofits struggling to find volunteers, but also on the other hand, volunteering systems are probably slightly out of pace with how people want to contribute today. Where is probably a different question, but is there anything that you think not, organizations could do to keep pace with how people want to volunteer or contribute in this day and age?
Oh my goodness. That is That is a $1 zillion question. There's so many factors at play. I mean, I just want to acknowledge that a lot of the organizations that we're talking about, even the large ones with really big budgets, capacity is such a huge issue. And volunteering, engaging volunteers in an intentional way that not only is going to help you do what you need to do in your community, um, but also, you know, it supports your sustainability. I mean, fulfilled volunteers are reliable volunteers. Fulfilled volunteers are potential donors. Fulfilled volunteers are potential employees. There's so many benefits um, to doing it. And most of the folks that we interact with in nonprofit organizations, they are the choir that we're preaching to. They already know this. They just struggle to find the bandwidth to be able to do it with intention because they're juggling so many other things. So I don't know if there's something that they can do better. I think that there are ways that we can support them better. You know, VGF funding would be lovely because the capacity building that comes with that and the training and the technical assistance that's possible with that and the peer learning that we could facilitate with that would be amazing. So I think they need more support, especially with youth. And then I will acknowledge there's also generational biases that youth come up against. I hear it a lot around um, instead of meeting youth today where they are, that their lived experience has created the way they perceive the world around them, and they're responding to the reality of their world. Um, there's a lot of judgment because their style is different, because their perception is different. And I think that's a big obstacle to overcome when people who have been working in these nonprofit systems for a very long time, myself included, I'm a Gen X, come up against a work style that's different than them. And there has to be some work done there about being open to a newer work style and finding ways to work together, and not saying, "Oh, these kids these days," right? That is the mantra, and it's a real obstacle. And I don't know that it's up to youth to prove themselves. I think it's up to us to move.
No, that's great. No, thank you. I think within Sewa, we have a program called LEAD. And within LEAD, this is for youth in general, high school students. We have a sub program called Design to Lead. And this particular program is usually focused on high school students and I think slightly beyond, if I'm not wrong. So this one actually involves high school students to get together to learn about design thinking and to apply the process towards solving a problem that is affecting the society and the community around them. And I think this is in a nutshell our attempt to see if we can help, not even help, if we can see how students in general and youth look at identifying an issue within their own communities and the unmet needs of the community, and actually come up with different prototypes or solutions around it, and also implement them within their own communities. And I think this way they've designed food drives, online programs around homelessness, and a few other things. So that in that manner, we are trying to see, if they stick with us for a longer time because they have the flexibility to actually involve themselves in the thinking process as they volunteer. So that is something that we are really proud of, and our lead directors are really proud of as well. And Ali, for the, I think, next question, like looking ahead, what is one investment that you think we need to make um, from now on, like to build a stronger volunteer infrastructure for the future so that sustainability becomes part of the process?
Sure. The I think the one that organizations have control over, which I think is the most impactful place to start, is investing what you do have in volunteer infrastructure. So whether that's coming up with a system, if you don't have one, an Excel spreadsheet is a fully acceptable way to manage volunteers. This building infrastructure doesn't mean spending all of your resources on the infrastructure. It's about doing what you can with what you have in a systematic way that builds your organization up for the ability to succeed. So investing in what you can. And then again, I think it goes back to volunteer engagement really is a profession, whether that the individual, the volunteer manager is the term I'll use, but you can be called a coordinator or lots of other things too, should really be invested in as a professional and in that job as a way for continued training or seeking best practices, whether that's engaging a consultant to help to assist them if they're newer, or looking at ways to build community amongst other volunteer engagement professionals and volunteer managers, I think is another really strong, impactful way that is low cost that an organization can support a volunteer engagement professional, which then in turn trickles down and does support better infrastructure for the program and for the organization.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. Kate, looking ahead, what is one change that you think you'd like to see in the national service system that makes service more accessible and sustainable for communities?
Just one?
You're happy with multiple.
That is a 2-day summit in and of itself. Oh my goodness.
We should do it together then. The next time we're going to do it together.
Well, I think one of the things that national service gets right is something Nyla raised, which is making contributing to your community more accessible and removing obstacles. And so a lot of service positions come with a living allowance, and some of them come with health care insurance, and some of them come with child care assistance. And so those are things that are moving in the right direction, but they don't keep pace with the reality of trying to survive in this world and dedicate that kind of time, because national service is a commitment. It is not an episodic, it is not a short term, it is a solid commitment of time and effort. And so removing obstacles and doing it in a way that makes it realistic and gets away from something that Nyla highlighted, where you open the door to more people to participate as opposed to the people who have the privilege to be able to afford to participate. So that is something I would like to see move forward.
Yeah. I genuinely appreciate that. This has been a very insightful conversation, and honestly, I've learned a lot. And I'm looking forward to all the emails with all the resources that Ali has mentioned during the conversation. And Kate, please, if you have anything, please share with us as well. We would be really glad to, learn more, involve ourselves, and see how we can work together as well. So now I would move on to the summary, just to summarize some of the things that we've learned, which is a lot. So I'll try my best to see if I can do it some justice. Um, I think one of the first things is that effective volunteer management requires infrastructure not just at an individual level, but we need strong systems around risk management and recognition, onboarding and offboarding as well. That was a great point that Ali brought up, so that it can improve volunteer experience, retention, and I think satisfaction also, the one that Kate was mentioning. And because overall it builds towards organizational effectiveness and community impact. And I think one of the things about the national service programs is effective ones emerge from a clear understanding of the community gaps and an openness to adapt and a strong mission alignment. So the objective is not always about fitting an organization into an available funding structure, but also to use resources where they genuinely strengthen the organization's ability to address a community need. Um, And I think for us as an organization, it's about shifting the question from who wants to volunteer to what skills does our organization need and who can help us fill that gap, be it through some of the employees from the other sectors who might want to volunteer through their skill sets in their particular sector. So skill based and episodic volunteering should also be encouraged, not just long term volunteering, so that we can allow professionals to contribute their existing expertise while giving nonprofits some access to capabilities that might not be otherwise possible due to several constraints. And I think with engaging with the emerging generation, whether it be Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and we have a few more coming down the lane, I think authenticity is what they're all looking for. They want to know what problem that they're exactly solving, how does it help the community that they're a part of, or is their solution effective? So I think it's more to move away from a transactional mindset about what they can do for us to a more relationship based approach, to ask them what we build together, what we can build together, what do they see in the community that needs fixing, and how do they think about contributing towards the solution. I think it also based on all our panelists, like even Naila mentioning it builds a more inclusive approach right from a very young age. They are more willing to be lifelong volunteers if you start it in a particular manner, like start them with design thinking similar to Sewa's design to lead program. And they, because they can quickly see the difference in doing something just for the sake of doing it and something for the actual impact and sustainability. So, at the end of the day, we also need to make sure that we create age appropriate, safe, and inclusive opportunities for these kids or youth, so that we can build this long term pipeline. And we need to also move beyond the traditional definitions of volunteering to engage younger generations, so that it's more meaningful and peer driven, also probably digital wherever it can be, but still make sure that there are opportunities to ensure that it is in person, so that they can, I think, have a palpable sense of impact. And volunteer engagement at the end of the day is a two-way relationship, because organizations need to invest in the infrastructure that supports volunteers, while also creating genuine mechanisms for volunteers and community members to share ideas and challenge assumptions. So the strongest systems are, also ask people not just to contribute their labor. I think this is something that Kate brought up, without valuing their knowledge or their experience, and just so that they feel like their context or their feedback is being taken. And the future of some of the effective nonprofit work is always going to be people centered and community led and relationship based. So there is a lot for us here, honestly, to pack, and I don't know if I was able to do the best that I could. But at the end of the day, I think what we're trying to see is we want to make sure that volunteering systems organize with a diverse set of volunteers, and we build opportunities as we can and work together across different organizations to ensure that everyone has a voice, and our work is meaningful and also starts with a proper problem statement. So this was a lot here, and I'd like to sincerely thank our panelists. Naila, just left us, Ali and Kate, for sharing your experiences, perspectives, and insights with us today. I'm definitely going to take a few things with me. I will read the book that Kate has mentioned. So thank you so much for being with us today and being so generous with your time on a weekend, and making time for such an engaging conversation. And Kate, I really wish you the best for your friend's wedding, which is happening in a few hours. So please join us for the next Seva Forum session today at 1:30 p.m. for an insightful conversation on the topic of potential to pathways about youth empowerment, job readiness, and digital opportunity. We are always looking to build long-term partnerships with our experts and also several of our audience. So if you have any questions for us, please email us. We are always very happy to involve, work with more people and involve ourselves in more projects as well. So thank you so much, everyone, and we will see you in, I think, 30 or 45 minutes. Yes. I think just one other thing to just mention is we will make sure that we'll share the key takeaways and reports from this particular session and all the sessions that we have after the event. So please keep an eye out for the reports and reach out to us, and please scan this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate and Alec. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ali, have a great wedding.
Sorry, Kusma. I mean, I don't know what happened. The internet dropped at the time, exactly at the time. So it was just crazy. So
No, no, no. That's totally understandable.